So yeah, thanks everyone for having me. I really appreciate it. I feel like I should mention, just because, I'm going to start using the cold dead hand of finance in just a matter of seconds. So before I get into that, I just want to say that I'm reminded from like the first seconds of this happy hour of the reason I got into all this in the first place. I was sort of picking around areas where I could, use basically apply business strategy but actually start to use it towards a climate remedy. And I went to the FIAS conference in Philadelphia, and it was really, I want to say, the attitude of the people that I met there that completely gave me the conviction to go 100% into this area. So it was really the people, and there were no, as I've said a number of times before, it was not a group of cocktail party environmentalists. It was a group of hardcore people asking questions, trying to figure it out. So anyway, so I just feel like immediately I'm just reminded of that was, with you, everyone talking here. Okay, so this presentation, really I just want to just start to wrap my head around and talk more about what starts to drive change. There's, frequently like an assumption that there's a state of inertia or things are far off, and that actually can perpetuate itself. So I just wanted to start to talk about some principles about how we can see what indicators of change are, and also, what role, and this is specifically applied to retrofits, and what I'm going to sort of lay out is what I see as the very specific rollout of the scalable retrofit solutions. What role people on this call can play in it, and what I think some of the first moves are going to be. So the first thing is, like, when talking about changing an industry or a large scale cultural change, there is a huge amount of deference to the status quo. There's a natural assumption that the status quo has some deep hold on reality. And as we've seen by the pandemic and moving, starting people wearing masks, although not all, but people wearing masks or working from home or working in pajamas or whatever, the status quo is a very, very fragile and precarious beast, and things can change very quickly. So the status quo is not due a huge amount of deference. A lot of things prop it up, and those underlying factors can change. And in my view, this isn't like a hypothetical. In my view, those things have changed already when it comes to retrofits. So I want to go over some of those things. So the reason why people, there's a bunch of reasons why people might think that this particular industry isn't going to change. Right? It's like real estate in general is thought to be an incredible lagger for any number of categories, from technology to, purchasing behavior, all sorts of things. But when you ask people, let's just say in the conventional building industry, are things going to change? They do what almost anyone does when they're faced with that question, which is they look to the past and they go, well, how long has it been this way? And they just naturally assume, oh, it's been this way for 50 years, 70 years, whatever they come up with, and just assume it will continue. They don't look towards the future and towards the unknowns because it causes discomfort. Another thing they might do is, just have basically a self-serving bias, which is like, I'm doing things this way, and I want to believe that I'm doing things the right way. So I'm biased towards believing it will continue, and that this is the way it is now is inevitable. There are any number of basically biases that can distort our view of the future and how likely things are to change. But those things, rarely do we actually, let's say, okay, let's make a bet on it. Let's start to actually do the math and think about what might drive change. Because if we went through that exercise, we'd come up with very different answers. So now just to jump through some of the signposts that are changed, and there are a ton of them. But I see it's some pretty simple math about how change is underway. And, one of them is the fact that it's underway already. And again, I'm referring specifically to retrofits throughout this presentation, especially multifamily. But in terms of this industry, there's already massive changes with startups like Open Door or Katera or Fundrise or MetaBuild in Germany. So there are all sorts of ways that people are chewing off and coming in different ways to attack the status quo when it comes to finding homes, when it comes to sales channels, when it comes to raising money, when it comes to investing, when it comes to fabrication. Um, so, um, so anyway, so it's underway. Here's another signpost. Um, you know, everyone here has seen this chart before. It's like not surprising, although it is shocking, how productivity can be at such a discrepancy from other industries. And I think the thing that's, I haven't heard it noted here yet, but when there is a massive discrepancy between industries and levels of efficiency, effectively that makes the industry that is lagging in efficiency seem inflationary. So your dollar doesn't go as far in that one area. This is why you can't buy, you know, I mean, you can start to buy now custom suits again, but for decades you couldn't buy a custom suit because that became inflationary. It didn't have a mass production quality to it. So it can serve to make that solution particularly expensive. And so what I think is relevant about that to retrofits is when it becomes unaffordable, nothing is done at all. So, you know, in most buildings, people aren't, most existing buildings, people aren't hiring architects to do complete remodels. Rather, they're choosing the deferred maintenance route and doing as little as possible. So here's another way to look at the opportunity, or here's another opportunity, and another way of looking at the signposts of change is just looking at all the costs in delivering a retrofit today. And this is with the conventional building value chain. Just huge amounts of sales costs, distribution network costs, inventory and carrying costs, huge numbers of margins, numbers of profit takers. And the opportunity is that anyone looking at this would be like, this is great news for two reasons. One, there's a huge amount of cost that can be taken out by more efficient approaches to the market. And two, some of the existing players delivering, you know, that are key to that value chain, have very few competitive options to change this. So new players can come in and disrupt them with very little repercussion because the incumbent players are not going to be able to catch up. So what's behind these drivers? When you look at that value chain for delivering a retrofit, it's the structure. There's all that transaction costs, all the uncertainty. I spoke to one subcontractor. I was doing a bunch of interviews with subcontractors, and they said to me, well, I could really lower my prices pretty dramatically if I was sure the GC was actually going to pay me. And so that's uncertainty, right? That's an uncertainty. So he actually raised his rates, right? And across all his projects. So on-site construction and the assumed variability of on-site construction for retrofits drives costs. Sales channel drives costs. So a number of cost drivers. But you know, basically there's a changing picture. We have a change in operational costs for building owners. So building owners aren't going to be able to tolerate the status quo. Increasing risks from many different directions, whether it's simply the water on the ground and the risk of water intrusion, or growing intolerance for flash fires, or seeing a carbon costs come down the pipe, rising healthcare costs, which are actually really significant. So there's a really quickly changing picture for building owners. So, you know, whenever we think, okay, so is this status quo durable, right? So rather than go, is change possible? Let's flip that question on its head and said, well, how durable? Is there something inherent about the status quo that prevents change? And the way I see it, I don't see anything that does. And does it pass the test? Is it cost effective? No. Is it delivering the best outcomes? Well, no, it's not addressing, just for one example, air quality issues. And are customer needs being satisfied? Absolutely not. There's a lot of needs being left on the table. So a new way. So let's just imagine a zero energy whole building retrofit company that has that delivers products, not a service, not on-site assembly, but products, whole building retrofit products, sells directly to the customer. There is no intermediary to add margins or uncertainty. They deliver a warranty that lasts the whole period of the financing. They deliver a service contract, which gives them, basically solves the split incentive problem by aligning the incentives between that building owner and the company that delivers that solution. So this model cuts a lot of costs out of the existing value chain for retrofits, and also allows that company to sell a differentiated product. So be able to say to the building owner, no, this is going to actually change the air quality for tenants, so they're not buying asthma inhalers. That's going to increase the amount of money that tenants have in their pockets, and that may even lower your tenant non-payment rate. Things like that they now don't have a channel or a mechanism to actually express to the building owner. So the benefit of taking such an approach is, of course, as Prudence just said, although my stats might be wrong, I defer to her stats, but 80% of buildings that exist today will exist in 2050. These buildings need to be retrofitted. So the potential market is incredibly large. In an offhanded way, I know I mentioned in a call that we could have 3 companies the size of GM all doing whole building retrofits, and none of them would ever bump elbows because they'd be so busy that they'd never be able to overlap with all the retrofits that need to be done. As Prudence said, we have 250,000 units committed to our RetrofitNY pledge already. And in New York alone, I believe there are 2.5 million units. Maybe I'm wrong about that. It's maybe 2.5 million residents in apartments, but I believe it's 2.5 million units in the state. So it's a big market. So now again, like, how do we know that change is going to occur? Well, we can just ask us a few really kind of broad questions about the market. What's better for a building owner? What's going to affect their decision? Would they prefer to make a phone call to request a bid, and a phone call that's going to, deliver them a number that they don't trust, and that's going to come in, say, 2 weeks to 6 weeks? Or would they prefer to go to a website to find a product that's already been applied to a building just like theirs, and they can see air quality, energy costs, and other outcomes already? Would they prefer to have 10 to 18 months of construction and not even be confident in that, and paying construction interest all the time? Or would they prefer to actually know that there are less than 3 months of construction? Would they prefer to have that major repair cycle be every 15 years, or a building lasts 25 to 40 or even more? So I think those are pretty obvious in their answers. And again, markets move because unmet needs have not been served. And there are currently unmet and fairly urgent needs on the table, and growing more urgent with time. So for that reason, as soon as a company finds an ability to address those unmet needs, the market will change. Obviously, the market is not going to change until there's an alternative, but as soon as there's an alternative, the needs are urgent enough that we can reasonably expect that market to move pretty quickly. So, one question to ask in any, whenever delivering a new product or service into the market is, what is that person trying to do? And what are building owners trying to do? They're trying to do these following things, pretty self-evident things. And how well are they able to do them with a conventional building? So when they're choosing between upgrading to a conventional upgrade of the building, swapping out their oil furnace for a natural gas furnace, they're really not going to be changing the performance of their building. But when you go through these things, you can see that all these things can be done better with a zero energy retrofit. What are tenants trying to do? Very simple things that they can all do better, achieve better with a zero energy retrofit. So these are all checked off. These are what drive markets, is what are people trying to accomplish. So this is, I think, this is a fundamental idea that no market can escape. It's not about the thing. People are solution neutral. It's about the outcomes. They're buying outcomes. The tenants are buying clean air, low energy costs, higher savings rate, healthier families, better sleep. The building owner is buying lower risk, lower non-payment rates, lower risk of moisture intrusion, structural elements protected from moisture, and so on. So people are buying outcomes. It's not about the object. It's not about square feet. It's about outcomes. So just thinking about it in a little bit more detail, what would a building owner pay to avoid this scenario? So in other words, we know that a zero energy retrofit is better than a conventional upgrade, but will they put money on the table? So these things have a cost associated with them. And if we interview building owners and say, what would they pay for certain events like this one, they will put money on the table to avoid that. The same with this, with insurance rates increasing, 33% year over year. That is really not, that's not acceptable for building owners. They can't handle that. That's really going to sink their profitability pretty dramatically and pretty quickly. That's doubling insurance rates almost every 2 years. So one way I think building owners, portfolio owners will look at it with this formula. So if you buy a car and take it off the lot, you know that you might crash the car and need to replace it. But you kind of dismiss that notion because you hope it doesn't happen. Optimism bias is it's not going to happen to me. And you pretty much, you have insurance and you don't think about it. But if you have a portfolio of 200 cars, then you look at the statistics and say, and I just throw this number out here, 1 out of 50 of my cars every year is going to need to be replaced because it's going to have a bad accident. So 1 out of 50, that's 4 cars I'm going to need to replace every year. What's the cost of replacement? Let's say every car costs $25,000. So the expected cost every year is going to be $100,000, and I need to factor that in. Well, that's the case for building owners with non-payment rates and going over the capital reserve because there's been a minor flooding damage, or there being a carbon tax and that changing things. All these risks can be converted into a cost that they can be expected to bear. And rather than bear it, they can actually just choose one option which frees them of those risks and those costs, which is a zero energy retrofit. So this is a phenomenon that I have been at pains to explain for a long time, which is when you tell people about a market changing, I've never experienced where people go, oh my God, that's so obvious. That absolutely is right. Or show me more information. People don't say those two things. What they do say is, no, that's not going to happen. No way, you're wrong. They're very free with saying that no matter how scant their evidence. So here are a couple of stages that I think occur whenever you tell people a market's going to change. If they're in that market, they are first annoyed with you, then they deny that it's going to happen, and then it happens, and they feel defeated, and functionally they actually kind of are defeated by what happened in the market. So the thing about business models is there's the model as it unfolds, but there's the model itself, and then it's implementation execution. So a person might have an idea which is going to destroy a market in 8 years, in 10 years. Think about Amazon, how that rolled out. It was a joke and like it wasn't profitable, and then it became a juggernaut eating up the world. And that's how these things work, is the model occurs and some people go, oh no, that's a warning sign. There's a tremor there. This industry is going to change. But a lot of people just choose to ignore it. And when you have awareness, it's a little bit like climate change with this, when you feel it, it's too late. So you have to recognize the model and how it's going to gobble things up. And when it comes to a model, a difference in a sales channel, rather than having a GC go on site, do takeoffs and do an estimate, having a company that hears, no, I have a product, I can give you an estimate in a couple of hours. That's a different sales channel, that's a different model. So in my view, things are actually unfolding now. And I can't estimate how long it's going to take to execute those exactly, but in the next couple of slides, I'm going to try. So next 5 years, this is what I am predicting will happen. We're going to see the first whole building products and the first use cases. And when I say use case, I mean, you can show a person a picture and say, here is a 3-story, flat-roofed, 15-unit multifamily, and these are the outcomes from that retrofit. Oh, you have a 3-story, flat roof, 15-unit multifamily? Well, you'll get these same outcomes, and this will be the same price. We'll start segmenting the market very carefully by typologies. Does one building have a mansard roof or not? You know, what's the cladding type? What is the height? So we'll have the data, first of all. We'll have the accurate building shell characteristics. We'll have the visual data, and we'll be able to actually give that to the industry so that they can segment the market into these segments and start approaching the customers. And then significant investment into offsite manufacturing, and of course going directly to the customer with new sales channels. So as far as orientation, instead of designing a product and finding customers, instead of waiting for a project, designing a product and then going customers, going to scaled solutions and products, and basically no more uncertainty. A service always has uncertainty. Products have predictable outcomes and prices, and people will pay for that improvement, that move away from uncertainty. And I predict that we will start to measure these things: avoided tenant non-payment, avoided building failure, avoided capital requirements, avoided emergency room visits, and so on. So lastly, our program, this is my summary of it. This isn't necessarily that everyone will agree with me about this particular, the summary. But first is we want to make it easier for companies who can execute the model I've just described to make it easier for them to enter the market. And there are a lot of things that are necessary to do to help them enter the market. Investing in R&D, tackling cost drivers in the value chain, some of them that I just described, and then supporting demonstration projects. And that's it. Here's my information if anybody wants to reach out.